Hello and welcome back to another episode of Fully Booked, the Hidden Gems author podcast, in which Craig Touch, myself, Roland Hume, chat some of the interesting figures and leading lights of this crazy industry of writing and publishing. And today we are delighted to have a returning guest, back by popular demand. He is Mr. Clay Vermulm, a dark horror author all the way from the Pacific and Northwest. Escaped all the snow that we had this weekend. How are you doing, Clay? Nice to have you back. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, I'm thrilled to be back on. Thanks for having me, and it is great to be back. Yes, I'm also glad I got to miss all the snow that happened over on the east side, so I lucked out.
And I'm sorry, you have my dog jumping in there. My dog is very enthusiastic about seeing you, so I had to hit myself on mute. Well, Clay, thank you very much for coming back. And we wouldn't be here, of course, without the man himself, Craig Touch, the owner and founder of Hidden Gems, and author himself. And he's back every week with me.
Yeah. How are you doing? I'm glad you came back, Clay, because we enjoyed the last talk, and I came on your podcast and I enjoyed that as well. And this time we're talking about horror writing, because you got a new horror book. Sorry for if you guys can hear. There's a bit of work going on in the basement. And if you have you write horror, and your latest book is coming out, and it's interesting. Like you're talking about something that I'm not a big horror person, so I don't read a lot and watch movies. It creeps me out. So I don't know the genres too much, but to me, I haven't really heard about this idea of writing about sort of like the aftermath of horror, like something goes wrong and then what happens to the families and how do they deal with that afterwards, which sounds like kind of what your book's about. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that and how that sort of works into the horror genre? Is that something that's normally done? And then we'll just go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a couple different ways to approach that, right? But I do think that grief is one of the most powerful and commonly explored elements of the human experience in horror, because grief is such a powerful thing, and so many monsters and horror tropes are kind of representative of those things that I think all people experience, but that are really difficult to talk about. I think it's something that monsters or horror tropes, as I mentioned before, do a really good job of like personifying. So there's a lot of creatures in folklore that basically are representations of some sort of mental struggles that are common amongst people, and that's why we see so much similarity across folkloric traditions all across the world, because we all sort of deal with a lot of the same things. And one of those things is definitely grief. A good example would be like Shirley Jackson's Haunting of Hill House, right? Especially the show. If you happen to have seen that show, if you haven't, you definitely should watch it if you like horror. It's an excellent show. Episode 1, you kind of establish that grief in the death of Nellie. And then the rest of the show is her family dealing with that grief and reconciling with it and processing it in their own ways and showing and personifying all the ways that grief kind of tears them apart in different ways based on who they are as people. And I think we all deal with grief in very, very different ways. It hits us all in different places, and we all have our different methods of trying to overcome it and trying to come out the other side. But it's one of the most difficult things you can go through when you lose a close family member or a close friend or something like that. And ultimately, I don't think there's much of anything that people fear more than like catastrophic loss or catastrophic change. It's kind of like most of the things we do in our lives are designed around trying to protect ourselves from catastrophic change, right? Like you want to work a good job where you get paid a lot of money. Well, you want to do that so that you don't go into debt. And so you don't have to sell all the stuff you like. And so that you don't have to like not have shelter and not have food. You feel better if your pantry's full. That's because you don't want to be hungry for a day. That's all related to change and loss and grief. And so I think horror can really, really mine that in a lot of really cool ways. And contemporary horror is doing a great job of that all over the place.
That's so interesting. Something I was looking into, your source of emotions, and it's like a lot of men, when they feel anger, it's actually your first
Yeah, like I think I was thinking about it a little bit more literally, and where something happens and then this family sitting around crying about it afterwards, or going crazy, or I just watched I don't know if it counts as horror really, but I watched Stranger Things, the first season, and there were monsters
definitely.
in it. That's horror. Okay, all right. So I guess I watched some horror. And like their kid gets kidnapped, and the mother is like beside herself with grief, as she would be, and I think about that, and it's almost like the psychological side of it, right? To that affects you. I mean, to me, that was more effective as a father, especially than the monsters popping out of the walls, which was scary too. But in my mind, it's like as an adult, I can say, that's unrealistic, not going to happen. But this feeling of grief because your child disappears, that can happen. And that can happen to me, and I would feel probably the same way. It's almost more easier to relate to it.
Yeah, totally. And that's sort of what I was speaking to you too, in a literal sense, from the storyteller's perspective. If you're coming at it as the artist, as the craftsman, that is what those monsters represent, even still. Like, people aren't afraid of monsters really because we know that they're not real. We're afraid of what they represent and what they can take away from us, right? And in the case of Stranger Things, that is our children, that is our families, and it's our well-being and our safety in our own home. Again, like that fear of loss and change, of losing your security and not being able to trust your own walls. That's a pretty terrifying thing to think about. And I think the monsters literally coming out of your household walls is pretty like representative of that fear that's kind of inherent in parenthood. I'm not a parent, but just from reading a lot of stories around that kind of thing. And sorry, Roland, you cut out a little bit. I wanted to hear what you had to say. What were you saying about anger?
Oh, that every emotion comes from another emotion. So, your instinctual thing is I'm angry, but are you actually angry? And it's like, no, you're angry about this because you're scared of losing something, or you feel weak, which is scared because you don't want to be weak. And it's funny, once you peel back the layers like an onion, fear is always the emotion that causes almost all other negative emotions.
The mind killer.
Yes, absolutely. Nice bit of Frank Herbert there.
Yep, absolutely. And I totally agree. You can peel it all back, and at the end of the day, it boils down to those couple of sort of primal emotions. I think almost all the things that a lot of those things we've called emotions are more like symptoms or reactions to what the real thing is buried beneath, right?
Yeah. Psychological horror, I think, is more something that I would be drawn to than the scary monster horror, which I don't like the jump scares. I'm too old. I don't think my heart can take it. But yeah, I think, if you think about sort of the psychological stuff, that's like, yeah, I don't mind that stuff. So what you're writing, your stories, are they more psychological, or do you have those monsters coming out of the walls?
Both. I don't think they have to be mutually exclusive. I think psychological horror is more about the intentionality behind what you use the monsters for. For example, even body horror, that a lot of people hear body horror and they go, I don't like that because I don't want it to be just gross, and I don't want gore just to be the point. And I agree. I am not a body horror fan in that regard. Like, if the point of the story is to gross me out, that's not usually my thing. But I have come to appreciate good body horror because it is the horror that leans into the psychological angle of losing control of your body, and the horror coming from within you, because the one place we can't escape is our body. So if you lose control of that, that can be a pretty terrifying thing. So when body horror does that, I can get behind it, even though gratuitous gore almost always is a turnoff for me. That being said, monsters kind of work the same way, in my opinion. Like, if you use a monster the right way, then it can be much more psychological than for the purpose of a jump scare. So like in my trilogy, and I'll let the work speak for itself. Read it and you tell me if you think it's a good example. I hope that it is. My goal with it is for the monster to be more psychological. This is book 1, Crevasse. Book 2 is called Cairn. That's coming out in May. But the story in Crevasse is about a couple rock climbers who run into like a skin stealer monster in the mountains while they are trying to climb a really hard climb. So the monster kind of represents that indomitable force of nature. And kind of the point of the first book is that you come into a sport like climbing from all kinds of different backgrounds, but sometimes it doesn't matter how prepared you are, you can still be killed by like a random avalanche. And so the monster kind of represents that type of fear. Like, nature is cold, nature is impassive. It doesn't hate you, but it also doesn't love you. It doesn't care. Like if you happen to be climbing in conditions when you shouldn't, you might die. I was inspired to write this book by the death of a famous climber named Marc-Andre Leclerc. He was an excellent mountaineer, super bold, super risky. And he did crazy stuff like that he should have died at all the time. But when he actually did die climbing, it was actually on one of the safer things he'd done. Like he was with a partner, he was roped up, he was just climbing kind of a routine thing and got killed by a random avalanche. So that was kind of like what inspired this idea of this monster. If you want to know more about him, he's got a movie called The Alpinist. It was excellent. Definitely recommend it. But yeah, it was so that's kind of the psychological angle there, leaning into that nature stuff, and then also leaning into the whole concept of I love shapeshifters and voice stealers, because I think they really help to channel that personification of our fear of losing our family, our fear of our loved ones, like coming back to haunt us, and that power that grief has over us once somebody's gone, how hard it is to let them go and how terrifying it can be to like face that reality of they're not coming back. We don't want to do it.
Is that what what you meant by skin stealer? Does that mean shapeshifter? I mean, I don't know all the lingo, I guess. I was like, why would somebody want to steal your skin? Like, is this like a
that's big on the Pacific Northwest though, isn't it? The skinwalkers and and it's all Native American stuff.
Yeah. I mean, there are like shapeshifter and skin stealer type creatures all over the world. But certainly in North American folklore, there's a lot of it. And that's my favorite kind of monster. Because again, I think it would be one of the most terrifying monsters I could imagine is one that takes the form of your loved ones. Because again, like when they're gone, I mean, that's the hardest thing I can imagine, to let those people go that you love the most. And if they came back, it would be so hard to, especially if you were looking right at them, to not believe it, you know, and you would want to believe it. You would want to go to them with all of your heart and all of your soul. So that monster is a apex predator, like few others in the, you know, like fictional monster realm, in my opinion. Like if I see a xenomorph, I know to run away. You know, there's no chance I'm going anywhere near that thing or the predator, right? But like if I see somebody who looks like my wife who passed away and talks like my wife who passed away, that thing's going to have a really good chance of getting inside my house and doing whatever it wants, because I would want to trust it and want to believe that so much. So that leads into the psychological aspect of a monster more, when it has those like qualities that allow it to sort of infiltrate the minds of the characters. At least that's the way I see it.
Yeah, Stephen King's Pet Sematary messed me up for that exact reason.
Yes.
It was like it was painful to read. It was like, oh my god, because you imagined yourself in that situation. You imagined if it was your kid, and it's like, yeah, it twists. I found what you were saying about. I'm going to read your book now because of the climbing. The scariest horror movie I ever watched, which I nearly walked out of. My wife loves horror movies, and I don't particularly like them for the same reason as Craig. It was called The Descent, and it was about a bunch of women who went rock climbing and spelunking, and I used to do a bit of that, and it's kind of scary. And halfway through the movie, no monsters, anything like that. It was just scary because they were lost and trapped, and it was a terrifying, super intense movie. And then they brought in the monsters, and I was just like, I nearly got up and walked out of the theater. So it's amazing how it's amazing how nature can be like the scariest monster of them all.
For sure. It's it truly is a great leveler, right? Like it doesn't matter who you are or how tough you are, how fit you are. If you're in nature, we're humans, we're squishy. Like, we might be smart, but we're pretty squishy. Like, we're substantially easier to kill than a deer. At the end of the day, they have a thicker hide. They're faster. They're stronger. They smell better. They hear better. They see further. Like, we are among the weakest creatures in nature when it comes to just pure physical bodies, right? So, like, if you put us out there, I mean, I'm a big fan of the show Alone. I don't know if you've heard of this show. It's just a survival show, but it's not like Naked or Afraid where they have a film crew and stuff. They genuinely go out with cameras and that's it. They're by themselves. They have to build a shelter. Like, the longest anyone's ever lasted on the show is 100 days, which is a really long time to be in the bush by yourself. But they take like 10 items to the backcountry and they survive as long as they can. The winner gets 50K or whatever. Great show if you like survival. But like you see in that show, all they do is look for food and try to stay warm. That's like all it is. And if you put yourself in those scenarios, those are your top priorities. And if you've ever been hungry, like really hungry, then you know that you can think of nothing else. Like, I was a wrestler most of my life, so I used to cut weight and stuff. And I have gone like 4 or 5 days without eating before. And I can tell you, like, you can't think of anything else. You can't like sleep. You can't do anything other than think about food. And you just fantasize and dream about food. And like, so when you like are in those situations, that's another like that power of isolation, like you're talking about, Roland. You don't even need the monsters for the descent to be scary, and then you add them on top of it. It just raises the stakes and the tension so much, especially if you do it at the right time in the story, right? Like, crank it up with the nature, and then you can turn it to 11 with the monsters, and make everything seem really, really bleak and hopeless, which is what horror can be all about sometimes, especially when it's psychological.
Absolutely. And on that theme, I was just going to ask, because Craig doesn't seem as familiar with the things that you should watch out for in the woods. And I don't know if this is in the same in the Pacific Northwest, but I remember coming to America and England, everything is like, it's like a teddy bear's picnic. It's all nice and parochial, and you can do that. It's nothing scary about the English woods. And I was in upstate New York, and we're in the middle of nowhere hiking through, and I got told you should never whistle in the woods. Because and like that, hearing the story of why you shouldn't whistle in the woods completely, and then you hear other people who are like, I whistle in the woods, and they came back home and I heard something scratching at the doors and things like that, and it was like, wow, it's okay. The woods are scary.
Why shouldn't we whistle in the woods?
There's definitely, and it depends on your region, but there's lots of stories about the spirit realm as it relates to indigenous folklore, where whistling in the woods will alert malevolent spirits and entities to your presence, and they will follow you home. Take it as sort of an invitation. If you're not familiar with indigenous lore, maybe you're more familiar with the concept of like a Ouija board, but it's sort of the equivalent of like, if your house is haunted, don't use a Ouija board, because you're actually inviting anything evil in rather than like getting rid of it, especially if it happens to be a demon instead of a ghost. You know, that's like a classic haunted house thing, right? They're like, oh, I think it's a ghost, let's try to talk to it, and it's like, that ain't a ghost, and then you got a bigger problem. So yeah, similar thing. There are primordial forces, spirit beings, and all kinds of different creatures out there that, and like indigenous folklore still believes in very thoroughly and real, out there in the woods, that have hunted and coexisted alongside mankind forever, and they are still to be feared and respected. So whistling in the woods can attract them in the wrong way.
Okay, so it does. Do you need a monster or like gore, I guess body horror, as you were saying, for it to be horror? I wonder, like, can you have a horror story that doesn't include those kind of elements, or does it then just turn into maybe like a psychological thriller or something like that?
That's a good question. When it comes to like, I don't think you need that stuff for a story to be scary, but like ultimately genre is just packaging, you know, for companies to sell your product and for readers to buy what they want to buy. Right. Ultimately, it's all window dressing at the end of the day. So like, I do think horror as a genre, and it's, you know, evolved over time. I think some like non-speculative books that are like scary in nature will still be considered horror, but I do think you're right that that generally kind of pushes them into the thriller category. Like if something's about a serial killer, people usually read that more of a psychological thriller. I think if you go looking for horror, you probably are looking for speculative elements. You want something supernatural or something at least like kind of weird and absurd that's going to push it out of the realm of like, oh, this is a serial killer story. So yeah, I do think that in terms of like branding and putting it in the horror genre, it tends to be a speculative genre more akin to sci-fi and fantasy. Whereas, you know, like you could write a historical fiction, but if it doesn't have dragons in it, then it's not going to be considered fantasy for the most part.
Right. Yeah, you know, because you were talking about body horror and you know, the psychological aspects of these things, and I was thinking of you know, because I agree. Like I mean, the body horror stuff, and I didn't know that was the term for it, but obviously, you know, the gory stuff. That I'm not a fan of. I'm squeamish. Like, I mean, I don't even want to watch somebody like you know, ER or something like that when they start cutting into people. I'm always turning away, right? But when I was younger and did watch some of these things, you know, the one that I think stuck with me the most, and it was probably more because of the psychological side of it, was Saw, right? Where it was like, it wasn't just the body horror. It was like, make a choice, you know, cut off your arm or, you know, cut off your leg or whatever it was, right? Like, that's like, then you start thinking, what would I do? I don't even, you know, that kind of stuff hits me far more. I remember those kind of things about the movie a lot more than I remembered the gore. Now I was probably watching like this, but you know, either way. Yeah.
No, and you're absolutely right about that. And it's interesting you bring up Saw, because that's an interesting case, right? I think people still kind of consider that a horror film, even though ultimately it's not necessarily. I don't think there's anything overtly supernatural about it. Like Jigsaw is a weird little character, but I don't know that Jigsaw is technically like a ghost. I haven't watched the entire Saw franchise or anything because that's not really my cup of tea. But it probably does push more into the realm of psychological thriller for me on a lot of levels, but I still do feel like it's got horror in its title if you like pulled it up on Netflix or whatever, or IMDb. Like another good example is Halloween, right? Like all the 80s slasher movies, they kind of like Halloween, I think, did start out as more of a serial killer story, but then Michael Myers, the more times they made his movies, the more he became like supernatural because they kept bringing him back from the dead. And I don't know how much of that was intentional from the jump, but I don't know that original Michael Myers was meant to like come back from the dead 1,000 times until like 2026 and to still be coming back from the dead, you know? Not like, and then Freddy Krueger is overtly supernatural, like he lives in the dream realm, so that's different. Yeah. But yeah,
well, what about so Friday the 13th? The first one was Jason dead or whatever, or was he always supernatural? I don't remember that. I think I did watch that one when I was young too, but I don't remember if he was supposed to. I know like eventually, yeah, he's the same thing. He would keep coming back, and I think there was one where he was in space even.
Yeah,
a little bit crazy.
He's been all over at this point, but I think yeah, I agree. I think that's more in the Michael Myers realm, as opposed to like Freddy Krueger, who is always a monster from the jump.
Yeah, so that makes sense. You gotta have supernatural, or you know, but I mean, like for me, Saw is like it falls into that gore category. It's like, I guess, yeah, it depends on how you define it. But to me, yeah, a movie like that where it's just a slasher film, I can't even imagine not calling that a horror. But I guess it's like, okay, well, so there's gore in it, and no supernatural element, so you call that a horror. But look at ER, you know, there's gore in that. Why is that not a horror? So yeah, it's not just the gore. It's also, I guess it's got to be combined with something else that really makes it into horror. So yeah,
I was just thinking of going back to Stephen King, which I guess deserves his rank as the master. But you look at it, and of course, Pennywise the clown is terrifying. But what's really terrifying are the human characters. You know, like her dad abusive, and the psychopathic teenager who like kills his dad and stuff like that. Those those people are scarier in some ways than Pennywise could ever be.
No, absolutely. And I mean, I was on a different podcast yesterday, my other podcast, Beneath the Rain Shadow, and we were talking about Scooby-Doo, because we were talking about our first loves in horror, and mine was Scooby-Doo was one of them. When I was a kid, that was like my gateway in, because Scooby-Doo is more mystery, really, because it's not actually that scary, but it does introduce you to monsters, and I think it gets you interested in folklore and things like that. But the point of Scooby-Doo is always that, right? When you take the mask off, the human was the scary thing underneath. And I was that's sort of what I was speaking to earlier too. Like, monsters, even in folklore, even in our ancient traditions and beliefs, I think are often meant to personify a human thing that we're afraid to talk about. Sometimes it's to dissuade you from going into the woods. How many stories are about like this creepy woman ghost kills men who are cheating on their wives? Like, that's such a common ghost story, right? That's a warning against that, and a cultural response to that kind of behavior. And I think a lot of like folklore monsters and creatures are that in stories. It's the power of storytelling to get a message across in a way that we're not going to hear if it's just told to us. I think if we read a story or watch a movie, whatever, read a story, we can see ourselves in the character, and that helps us understand why something is wrong, or why something should be avoided, or why we should think a different way about a certain topic. At least that's one of the ways I see it. But Pennywise is a great example. So is Pet Sematary, Roland, right? It's not really scary if you don't fricking bury your kid in the graveyard. Like, if you learn to deal with your grief and process really hard emotions in a healthy way, instead of trying to never lose anything and keep your attachments ever present in your life, then if you can't learn to let go of things, you will have to suffer even more. You will have to suffer those consequences. They just look different than the consequences of allowing that attachment to go.
But they're equally horrific in real life. So go to therapy.
Right. Go to therapy. Exactly.
Yes.
Go to therapy. Do not bury your kid in an ancient graveyard that brings him back to life. It won't work. It never works, people.
Yeah,
it never works.
Mean, the ancient graveyards are always the bad thing, right? Poltergeist had that too. Oh, well, let's just build our house on top of an old burial ground. Yeah.
I mean, in some ways, America is built on an Indian graveyard. So
yes,
I guess.
And look what's happening right now.
Yes, yes, it is.
Okay, so and then another big sort of theme is isolation, right? So I guess that goes to maybe again I'm being too literal, but this idea that we're all sort of like scared of being alone, especially as children. That's probably one of the biggest fears, right? Oh, I don't want to be alone. I'm scared of the dark, and yet in almost every horror movie that I've seen, it's always like, oh, there's a murderer loose. Okay, well, I'm going to go check it out by myself. What are you doing? Like, what are you doing every time? Right. So it's almost like they put themselves into that isolation. But yeah, like, so I guess that's part of it is, right, this like preying on you, separating you from the pack, and then picking you off one by one, and sort of that fear that I'm sure goes back to our caveman days.
I mean,
that's something that you sort of like explore a lot in your book, I think, as well, right? And so this is probably something that you think is a pretty big tenet of horror.
Absolutely. I think isolation is one of the most powerful tools that the horror writer has in their toolkit, and learning to use it effectively will immediately make your stuff scarier. And here's the reason. Everybody can relate to being lonely. And I think the most powerful thing that writers can do, this is my opinion, but I think the most powerful thing we can do is find ways to get the audience to see themselves in our characters, because then they will learn from the lesson of the story, and they will fear for the character. And in horror, there's nothing more important than character development for that reason. Like, if I don't care that character goes around the corner and might die, if I don't care if they die, then I'm not afraid. Right. So I have to have you care about my characters, but first and foremost, before anything else in the story will work. And the best horror movies do that well. Again, Pet Sematary, especially the book, is an excellent example of that. They've never really executed the films very well, in my opinion. I love the book though, and it's just a heart-crushing book because you can totally relate to and empathize with the father, the mother, the sister, everybody in that story, because Stephen King's the master at character development. And that's why his stories work. Same with The Shining. Like, you can see yourself in the shoes of Danny, in the shoes of his father. You could see yourself in Jack's shoes. Yeah. So like that character development is key. And when you isolate a person, you can do it in so many different ways too. So isolation horror, like in my books, the rock climbing books, obviously there's a physical aspect to that, similar to The Descent, where it's geographic isolation. But there's also other categories like social isolation. There's lots of stories that are about that, where somebody feels alone in a crowded room. And that's a terrible feeling. And if you feel like you don't have a community, or you feel like you can't go anywhere with your problems, you feel like nobody will believe you. How often is that a horror trope, right? I mean, that's one of the oldest ones in the book too. Like, somebody knows the house is haunted. They try to tell their husband or their wife or their best friend, and their best friend says, "You're crazy." That makes you feel even worse. And then that makes you start to wonder if you are crazy. And then you have to wonder that. And then you're fighting yourself, and you're fighting this entity. And usually, if it's a malevolent, supernatural entity, especially like a demon or something, that's exactly what they want, right? They want to isolate you. So you kind of have all that working against you. And isolation is a very powerful tool.
And that's why cults use it, isn't it? That's why they isolate your families. And
yes, that's the first thing they do. They indoctrinate you. They teach you that what you learned before was a lie, and that the right way to do things is this way. And the only way it'll work for you is if you cut off those people who don't agree with you. They cut you off from your friends. They cut you off from your family, and they try to take those places. They try to possess you, essentially.
Yeah, I thought it was more to do that so that those people wouldn't talk you out of joining. But I guess it's both.
Well,
right?
that too. Yeah, that too. They go together, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So, and in terms of people listening to this being like, I want to write a scary book, you've covered a lot of ground. Maybe you could like pull it back into some bullet points. So someone's listening here and they're like, how do you write a scary story? Come on, give us your bullet points of your 1-2 punch of terror.
Okay. I'll try. There's definitely lots of good books and places you can go to learn that as well. Lots of good blogs and stuff. I'll send you a list, because I'm bad at thinking of those things off the top of my head, for the show notes or whatever. But yeah, I mean, I would say I usually go into it with some sort of thing that I'm wrestling with, either like a concept or something I'm working on in my own mental health or whatever. And try to find a way to put somebody through that, and show a way that you can come out on the other side of it. And it doesn't always look pretty, especially in horror. There's a lot of times it doesn't look pretty. And sometimes it not looking pretty is the best thing you can do. Like, I'm also a big fan of realism. So at the end of the day, I usually want my story to feel like this could really happen, even if there was a monster involved. But yeah,
I think that's brilliant.
Thank you. I think so too. No, I'm just kidding. But I think it always starts with your characters. That is step number one. So like, you need to find a way to get people to empathize with your characters. And you can do that in a variety of ways, but it starts with them feeling real. Whatever circumstance they're in, ground it and make it feel like something that could happen to anybody. If you can find a way to make anyone reading feel like they could be that person, they could relate to that person. And that doesn't even if they're in a crazy situation, but you see this done well all the time. A movie I just watched that does it really well is No Other Choice. It's a brand new Korean film by the same guy who directed Old Boy and a couple other great movies, but he did a really good job with it. The premise is this paper mill worker loses his job, and he was like a supervisor. So he was doing really well, just bought his first house, all this stuff. He gets fired because the company's basically like replacing him with AI. And then his solution to get a new job is to kill everybody who's like interviewing for the other job that he's interviewing for. So there's like 3 other guys that are a better candidate than him, and he goes out to kill them all. And the first time he kills somebody is like 2/3 of the movie, because it just takes a really long time for him to get up the guts. It takes him a long time to figure out how to do it. And then when he does it, it's a total botch job. It's like an absolute mess. He leaves a witness. He's like he gets shot himself, and there's like all this shit happening. And then the second and third kills go progressively smoother, and they go a lot faster. And it's really brilliant the way it's structured. But I recommend trying to find a way to do that in your story. Like, find a way that no matter the circumstances, the people doing it feel like real people, and they feel like this is how real people would do this. Another great piece of evergreen advice regarding character development, and this is kind of like from Save the Cat and Stephen King's On Writing, but just like, your character should either be really good at what they do, or they should suck at what they're trying to do, because that gives you a direction to go either way. If they're really good at what they do, then showing them fail and having to figure out how to do it again, or maybe losing their love for it and trying to find a new way to reconnect with it, can be a great way to create empathy, because we can mostly relate to that, right? We've all been good at something and then lost our interest or lost our momentum, or maybe we built a career and then lost that career, and now we have to go murder people to get it back, per my previous example. Or if you suck at it and you really care about it, you're passionate about it, you have lots of directions to go with that, because we can all relate to that too, wanting to follow a dream or something that's never like come easily to us. So yeah, I don't know if that's all helpful or just a bunch of rambling, but I would say it starts with characters.
Yeah. I was just thinking of the horror that really messes me up is, I'm a complete skeptic. I don't believe in any fairy tales or the superstition or anything like that. So things like The Exorcist and films about people getting possessed and stuff like that mess me up, because they're real people that you can believe in, and then you see this happening to them and you're like, oh my God, this is somebody I believe in, and what they're doing is, it sells it, and we are told that it's a supernatural cause of it, and then I'm a skeptic, so I don't believe that, and yet I can't deny the evidence in front of my eyes. And what you were saying really resonated with me that way, that the more real you make it. I've read Stephen King's On Writing as well, and I hadn't actually clocked that bit about make someone really good at something or really bad at something, and that's great advice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And yeah, I mean, I think the one of the other best ways to make somebody feel real and empathetic is make sure your dialogue sounds real. I mean, that's like a nice practical tip, but like a practical tip is read your writing out loud once you're getting near your final edits, like before you send it off to your final copy and line edit or whatever, your final stages. I recommend reading the entire book out loud to yourself. It sounds weird, but you will catch everything. You will catch the places, you'll catch a lot of grammar stuff, but on top of that, you'll catch the places where your dialogue doesn't sound realistic. People don't talk the way they are written so often. And if you can master the art of making people in your books talk the way people really talk, then that will go a long way in like generating empathy and believability in your characters too. And then on that same note, the way people act in relationships, like if you can master that art of like, this relationship feels real, then you can get people to really care about the relationships. And if you're writing horror specifically, you need that. You need that more than anything. We need to care if your character is in danger. We need to care if your character is going to die. We need to care if your character's friend dies. That shouldn't just be cannon fodder. They should matter to the reader. Like when that side character dies, we should care. It should generate more fear. It should generate more isolation for the character and more empathy from us as the audience. Every death should matter. Every death should feel earned. That's a big thing I believe in. One of my mentors is Richard Thomas. He was an editor for Dark House Press when that was around. Has done a lot of anthologies in his own writing. He's awesome. But that's something he really emphasizes. Like every death needs to be earned. You shouldn't just be killing people just to kill them. If they're going to die, it should matter. and every death on the page should have a real purpose behind it. It should serve the story in a larger way than just blood and guts.
I find that so interesting because in terms of often you watch something like Game of Thrones, I know that's not horror, but one of the reasons why when we were watching it, our hearts were in our throats is because the death of a certain character had kind of established, hey, anyone can die in this. So therefore, your hero isn't safe. Because if you watch James Bond, you know James Bond's not going to die except in the last one. But if you, Indiana Jones, you know Indiana Jones isn't going to die. Whereas you watch Game of Thrones, you're like, the person I love could actually die at any time, and it really puts that fear into you.
Yeah, and I pull Game of Thrones way too often as an example because it just is a masterclass for like character development and relationships and real stakes, which is another thing I'm a huge proponent of and a big fan of. I love when the stakes feel real. If you can accomplish that, then you will have your readers exactly where you want them. If they really think that what they're afraid could happen could actually happen. But that's hard to do because it involves investment in a character that you intend to kill. Again, if you're going to kill a character that you invest a lot of time in and force your readers to invest in and create expectations around and like hopes for and like an idea of where that character should go based on other stories they've read, and then you subvert that by killing the character, it needs to feel justified. It needs to feel real. And that's something about the character you're referring to in Game of Thrones, Roland. Like, we didn't expect that to happen, right? When we were watching or reading for the first time, we didn't expect it because most fantasy stories don't do that. But when it did happen, just look at history. That is what really happens to people like that in real life. And you can pull from that. And if you do a good job of developing the character, the relationship, the stakes, then readers will connect to it on a deeper level.
Yeah. I mean, you risk, I think, alienating some readers if they really, I don't think a lot of readers love when they kill off main characters. You can get away with it, obviously, in horror, for sure. And Game of Thrones got away with it, but I think as it went on, he wasn't killing Tyrion, he wasn't killing Cersei, he wasn't killing the ones that like really became popular and he spent a lot more time on. He did it early on because it was easier, right? We're not quite as invested, but yeah, I think it gets harder as you go. What's the point of a horror though? If you really think of it, is it really just trying to scare people, or is there a deeper sort of point to horror stories?
Oh, there's so much more to it. First and foremost, there's a biological thing. People, fear and pleasure live very closely together in our brains. I mean, when you do something that's really thrilling, and that just depends on what it is for you. A part of what you love about it and what is so exhilarating is the part of your brain that gets opened up, those floodgates, when you experience real fear and real danger, at least as you perceive it. Like maybe it's a roller coaster for some people where it's controlled enough, you feel safe enough, but you're still going to get that drop in your stomach when you go over the big drop, right? It's different for everybody. For me, it is rock climbing. And it's like getting really high and taking a couple falls. And like you get into this zone where the whole rest of the world just melts away because you're so focused on what you're doing. And that starts as fear. But the further up you climb and the more often you climb, the less it's fear. And the more it's like this moment of intense, like euphoric focus. It's just so all encompassing. And it's a beautiful, beautiful feeling. And it's just exhilarating because you're like exhausted and terrified. But when you get to the end, it feels so good. It's such a like release and it just feels primal. And I don't know how else to describe it, but I think we've all experienced it. Sometimes you experience it by accident, like you almost get in a car accident or something and you hit the brakes in time and then your heart's going, right? But after you like settle down from that and realize you're okay, like your body is so awake and you're just like alive. And fear does that for people. So I think there's a lot of us who seek that out because we actively like to activate that part of our brain. I've liked horror since I was a little kid. I watched like M. Night Shyamalan movies and that closet scene in The Sixth Sense was like the first time I watched a movie and was like really scared. And then afterwards I watched it again, and like thinking back, I'm like, yeah, I think that was when I realized like I like being scared. It's fun. People love campfire stories. Like there's a reason for that. So there's that like biological level. And then kind of like I've spoken to quite a bit already on the show in my typical rambly fashion. I do think that horror is one of the best genres for exploring psychological trauma and for exploring like societal grief and societal oppression and things like that. Like these really, really big, heavy, tough topics that are hard to dissect, because you can put it as a monster, you can put it as a speculative element, whatever that has to look like for you, whatever it feels right in your story, whatever it needs to be. And you can not pull any punches. You can take the gloves off and you can show how fucking ugly it is. Sorry, can I cuss on the show? I've already done it, but you know, yeah.
I'm fine with it. YouTube will have to deal with it.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry about that.
No worries.
But you can show
Well,
how
you know,
ugly it
that's
is.
just words.
What's that?
I said that it's just words. We're writers.
That's right. That's right, Roland. That's right. It's just words. Deal with it, YouTube. But yeah, you can show how ugly it is. You can show what it really is. And I think horror is really good at taking the mask off of those things and giving you a good, honest look at them. Because other genres have to conform to other expectations and standards. Romance is a good example. This isn't me hating on romance. I think romance is great for a lot of reasons. But romance has its formula, right? We expect that the people will end up together at the end. And as it's been explained to me by romance writers, I am not one, but this is how it's been explained to me. If they don't end up together at the end, romance readers will throw a fit, right?
They will. Yep.
So like that's an expectation, you know? And you have to conform to to a certain degree. Now there's always like subverting tropes, subverting expectations is a huge part of writing. But so is delivering upon the promises that you make in your story early on, that you make with the genre that you write in. Like, I think those are all sort of like invisible social contracts that we sign as authors. If I say I wrote a fantasy book, you're going to expect some stuff. You're going to expect some magic. You're going to expect some fantastical creatures. You're going to expect maybe some political intrigue. And you're going to expect it not to be a horror book, you know?
Right.
You're not going to expect the heart and soul of it to be intended to scare you. You're going to be expected it to make you think fantastically, for you to imagine and for you to dream, right? If it's like sci-fi, you're going to expect it to analyze some socio-political stuff. You're going to expect some deeper looks into technology. And how technology interplays with humankind. And that's all like an integral part of sci-fi. And if it's not there, people are going to be like, this isn't really sci-fi. And sometimes they can't even say why, but we know it when we see it. So for horror, I think that works the same way. And I think it's got its own level of importance in the speculative fiction world.
I love that. Well, unfortunately, we're coming up to the top of the hour, but that's kind of a good footnote to the fascinating discussion we've had. So, Clay, that has been amazing. Craig, do you have any final questions before we ask Clay to share with our readers and our listeners and our viewers where they can find out more about his books?
No, listen, this has been a great discussion. I'm always happy to have Clay on, and he's a great guest because he does a lot of the talking, and that takes the burden off of us. but yeah, no, thanks for coming on. This has been great. Anybody who's interested in writing horror, I think that this is a really, really great episode to get them understanding sort of what goes into the genre. So thanks for that.
Thank you. I'm honored to be on and really glad to be welcomed back. So thank you guys so much.
So where can our listeners and our viewers find more about your book, specifically that climbing book? That sounds amazing. What is the title of that?
Yeah, so the book one is called Crevasse. And that is from Dark Forest Press. I don't know if you can see it there on my camera, but that's a small publisher out of Bellingham. This is book one of The Voices from the Cold. That's a trilogy. Book two is coming out in May of this year. So that's May 2nd on Saturday, but pre-orders are available now. So I'll give you guys the link. And if you love indie authors, which if you're listening to this show, I assume you do, that is the best way to support us, is by going ahead and pre-ordering that book and leaving reviews after you read it. So yeah, that will be something I share with you. You can find me online. I'm pretty much on all the socials as at Clay Vermulm Fiction. And then my Substack is the Fermented Fiction Substack. You can go there, and I leave weekly horror recommendations and reviews. So I'm doing movies and books on there, but horror that I really love. I don't review anything I don't like. So if you see one of my reviews on there, it means I'm saying go watch it, go read it. So if you're looking for contemporary horror to read or watch, go ahead and subscribe to that. Get it right in your inbox every Saturday. And then I got my podcast, Fermented Fiction, which is we've had Craig on the show. Roland, we'd love to have you on sometime. That would be a good time.
I would be down for that. Absolutely. I enjoyed the Terminator discussion.
Hell yeah, it was fun. And Fermented Fiction, that's a show where we debate movies, books, and films in the genre fiction categories, so sci-fi and fantasy included. We roll 2 d20s. If you roll high, you have to debate for it. If you roll low, you have to debate against it, regardless of what you actually think. And then after we're done with the debate, we get drunk together and have a panel discussion about the chosen thing and whatever other arts discussion comes up as a result. Because all books and stories and movies have a story behind them and themes and all kinds of creative topics to explore. Yeah, and then I guess I got this one other book too, Rain Shadows. So this is a collection of short stories. They all take place in Washington State, and they're all prompt inspired. So we have a 3-part prompt for every story, and that's co-written with my friend Tamara K. Selman. So yeah, you can also pick that up at my website, clayvermulmfiction.com or rainshadowstories.com.
Fantastic. Well, we will make sure to pop a link to that down in the description down below. So if you are listening or watching and have enjoyed everything that Clay has shared with us today, make sure you scroll down there and click on that link and check out his website and his books. And while you're down there, you will pass that big empty comment section. So make sure you leave Clay a comment and let him know how much you appreciated everything he shared with us today. And of course, there is that like button. Give that a smash. There's the subscribe button if you haven't already, and there's that bell icon that you can click on to make sure you get notified every time there is a new episode of Fully Booked. And of course, there will be a brand new episode of Fully Booked coming same time next week. So until then, cheerio.